Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Gameweek 6 preview where we'll be discussing things such as, should you be looking to wildcard this week? Is now the time to sell Mohamed Salah? Should you go for double Arsenal defence or double Arsenal attack? And much, much more. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button. And if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, if you've been active over on social media or if you've been watching a lot of content recently, you'll know that Game Week 6 wildcard is extremely popular. And I would go as far as saying I think this will be the most popular week for a wildcard in the first half of the season. And don't worry, if you are new to the game, we get a second wildcard from Game Week 20 onwards. But as a result, some people are asking me, like, how do I know if I should wildcard in Game Week 6? They're sending me their team and saying, does this need a wildcard? So I thought it would be useful to discuss, like, how do you distinguish when your team needs a wildcard or not? And don't worry, if you've already used your wildcard, you've already activated it this week, or you know for a fact you're not using it this week, this is still a useful discussion because I'm going to talk about the times when you decide when to play a wildcard. And I think a well-timed wildcard is one of the most important things in FPL. Getting that window right can be extremely important for your overall season. So I've separated it into kind of like four things, but I just wanted to point to that bottom thing first, which is just because you don't need a wildcard doesn't mean that it won't be worthwhile or valuable. And this is something I have to remind myself of. I am sometimes... One of the big criticisms, I would say, of my management, and I'm doing it probably again this year, is I'm like, just because my team it doesn't need a wildcard, so I'll hang on to it a bit longer. And I sometimes do hang on to my wildcard for a bit too long. I wait until the last possible moment to play it, and maybe a slightly earlier, slightly more aggressive wildcard would have been better. So just because you look at your team and think, oh, it doesn't need a wildcard, doesn't mean that it won't necessarily benefit your team. So the first and most important thing for me when it comes to wildcard is fixture swings. And what we mean by this is, do your players in general have a tough run of fixtures coming up, especially in the week that you're looking to remove them? But also, are there really good players that are great FPL options that are about to go into a good run of fixtures? So what I'll point to now is a team like Newcastle are about to go into a very tricky fixture run, especially this week playing against Man City. And there are teams like Arsenal, there are teams like Brentford that have a really nice set of fixtures coming up, starting with home fixtures this week. So if you are sat there with Lewis, Hall, Gordon and Isak still in your team and you have zero Arsenal, immediately, even disregarding who the players are, you've got 3 Newcastle assets that you probably want to move on. You've got 3 Arsenal assets that you'd like to bring in. So even that alone is 3 transfers minimum. Already, without even discussing the other reasons for a wildcard, that's probably in and of itself enough. So for me, fixture swings is the big thing. So just look at your team now and think, do they have not only tough fixtures this week, but from Game Week 7 onwards as well? And are there other players that I would like to bring in and get on quite early? Fixture swings is difficult because I'll point to my team now as an example of my team from Game Week 7 looks horrific, like really, really rough. But in Game Week 6, the fixtures are really strong. So whilst, yes, my team in general are transitioning into a set of tough fixtures, and I'd like to move my team on to a team that has really good fixtures coming up, Game Week 6 doesn't feel like the best week to do it. So there is also a timing element of here that you don't want to jump off of your players too early to bring in other ones. So it's a very fine line, and you just have to decide if it's too early for your team. For me, it feels like it potentially could be. The other reason is restructuring. So I don't think that a smart use of transfers, if you have the wildcard in the back pocket and it's a good week for a wildcard anyway, is to use transfers restructuring. I tend to find that transfers are best used for things such as moving one 8 million asset to another 8 million asset that has a better fixture coming up and maybe is playing really well and has slightly more attacking threat or has penalties. I don't think you... Because let's say, for example, you want to remove Salah, you want to bring in Haaland, you want to take a bit of money out of your defence and move it into the forward line, you're looking at like 4 or 5 transfers there. And yes, you're bringing in the assets you want. Yes, you're bringing in a Haaland. Yes, you're bringing in the forwards that you'd like and selling defenders that maybe you don't. But I still don't feel like it's valuable use of your transfers in the sense that you're not just using transfers on high upside players that can bring you lots of points. You're also using it on restructuring and redistributing the funds. So if you've got a wild card sat there right now, and instead you're thinking, I might take a -4 or -8 to remove Salah and bring in a Haaland, which is something that I looked into myself. At that point, you just use the wild card because it's there for you for that reason. And because the wild card now doesn't wipe out your free transfers, it's not such a huge issue, obviously, keeping your free transfers and wildcarding instead, because you can come out the other side still with those free transfers intact. The big thing for me that I'm struggling with at the moment is the next one, which is team value. And for me, I'm pretty happy not playing the wildcard this week, other than for the fact that team value is a huge issue. I've already got poor team value, and when there is a popular wildcard window, such as Game Week 6, because lots of people are making transfers and bringing in the players for this set of fixtures coming up and also for their wildcard, lots of price changes happen for the players that you probably don't own because you're not wildcarding that week, so you can't bring in all of those popular assets. So if you delay the wildcard by a few weeks, you are not only potentially missing out on points, but you're missing out on a lot of team value. I'll use the example. If I wildcarded this week, I would have had David Raya, I would have had Mbeumo as well. Both of them have already risen, so I've already lost 0.2 million. I've already as well hung on to the likes of Diogo Jota. I held on to Alexander Isak for a bit. I'm holding on to assets that are falling in price because nobody really wants them anymore. Henderson and Eze, I would expect, could be falling again very soon. So this is the issue, is not only are you potentially losing out on points and fixtures and stuff like that, but you're also really struggling with regard to team value. So when you do wildcard, you might miss out on a few key players there because you can't afford everyone. So this is the big thing for me. Again, I still am looking at probably delaying the wildcard 1 week, but I'm bleeding team value at the moment. So maybe if you just don't want to do that, just going in the week where everyone else is might make sense. Lots of people wondering, why are so many people suggesting making your transfers and then activating the wildcard last minute rather than just activating the wildcard at the start? The reason for that is transfers made when the wildcard chip is active do not contribute to price changes. So if everyone in the game, let's say everyone in the world activated their wildcard chip this week and they all made transfers, no price changes would happen because it's only transfers outside of the chips that contribute to price changes. So if you are on a wildcard this week, a little tip for you, and you've not already activated your wildcard, is don't activate it. Make loads and loads of transfers as long as you remember before the deadline to still activate your chip. Because if you forget, you've probably taken like a minus 40 hit. But yeah, that is the reason that a lot of people will only activate their wildcard at the last second. The only other reason I can think that you might want to activate your wildcard on top of all of that stuff is obviously those squad players. So lots of you might be sat there with like Quansah, Hall, Barco. Maybe you've got like a 4th or 5th midfielder that doesn't play, or a £4.5 million forward, and that might be a good reason as well. It might be that, yeah, you still have Haaland, you've got Saka, you've got an Arsenal defender. Maybe you have a lot of those key elements in your team, but maybe there are a couple of issues, plus you've got a really weak bench and you've got a really weak sort of 7th or 8th attacker. That, again, might be enough in and of itself to activate the chip. So, hopefully that helps you. There's not a one-size-fits-all. I can't just say, yes, if this is your team, you wildcard. But that should give you a bit of an idea. Firstly, look at the fixtures. Then look at, do I want to redistribute and restructure my team? Am I bleeding team value? And is that going to be an issue in the long term? And do I need to sort out any other sort of miscellaneous squad issues around my 8th attacker, £4.5 million defender, etc. I think if for a few of these you're going, yep, needs to do that, then probably it is the right time to play the chip. And this does feel like a really good window. We've got 5 weeks of data. The fixtures are turning for a lot of players. And I think really this week in particular, if we're focusing purely on Game Week 6, Arsenal feel like the key thing. If you don't have at least one Arsenal, and let's say you got 0 or 1 Arsenal, I mean, it looks like you're needing to use at least 1 or 2 transfers just on Arsenal alone, plus all of the other issues you might need to sort out. So I will leave it there. Let me know if you're wildcarding in Game Week 6. And later this week, probably on Friday morning, I'll have a wildcard draft. So make sure to subscribe if you want to see what I would be going with on a Game Week 6 wildcard. So it wouldn't be a Game Week 6 preview without talking about Mohamed Salah. So let's have a chat around the man, because in Game Weeks 4 and 5... he was basically essential for a lot of people. He had back-to-back home fixtures. Lots of people even wildcarded him for pretty much just to bring Salah in. Some people even sold Haaland to bring in Salah, and obviously that didn't go particularly well. But on paper, back-to-back home fixtures, he had 41 points in the first 3 weeks, which was remarkable. It matched Haaland, who had back-to-back hat-tricks, right? So it's crazy that Salah did that well. But then he's gone and blanked and got a single assist in the last 2 weeks. And he's about to go into a very tricky fixture run now, and he's very expensive. So, should you be selling Mohamed Salah? I think on wildcard, and I'll focus on wildcard first before I talk about with transfers. On the wildcard, I do think it makes sense. And the reason for that is you're going to want to have Haaland. I really wouldn't be going without Haaland for this spell here. And that's not me just saying from personal experience because it's so painful, but just the fixtures coming up. They've got Newcastle this week, which isn't a bad fixture at all, given that they just shipped 3 goals to Fulham. They are not defending well. In fact, you could argue they're even weaker than Wolves so far this season. So that's not a bad fixture. It's then Fulham at home. They then play against Wolves themselves. They've got Southampton at home. The run of fixtures for City is just a joke. So you're going to want Haaland. Let's say you also want one of at least Saka or Havertz, or you want an Arsenal attacker of some kind. You probably want at least one Arsenal defender. You probably want Trent. Then if you also want to squeeze in Mbeumo, maybe you want to squeeze in a Solanke or a Jackson or a Watkins, I mean, try and even if you're not on wildcard, try and build a wildcard draft where you can have Salah, Haaland, an Arsenal attacker, a decent other attacker like a Watkins, Solanke Jackson, Trent, Gabriel. You just can't do it. So I think on a wildcard, unless you are really happy sacrificing one or two of the players that I've just mentioned, getting Salah in is extremely difficult. Now, I'm not trying to put you off doing it, because if you can get Salah in a wildcard draft, getting a differential Salah is always a really good thing. And that's where this then moves me on to, if you're talking about transfers, there is absolutely no need to rush Salah out this week. And I would go as far as saying, even if I had 5 free transfers and no Saka, I would not use a free transfer to do Salah to Saka, because in my opinion, and I don't think this is an opinion, Salah is a better FPL asset than Saka, unless I see otherwise across the next 6 to 10 weeks. I would need to see over a large sample that Saka consistently overperforms what Salah is doing. For me, Salah is a better asset. He's got more goal threat. He's more integral to everything that Liverpool are doing, although that might change soon with Luis Diaz taking the reins in terms of goals. But Salah's just that guy. I even think that Salah's minutes are better than Saka's as well. So to answer that question, because I got it a lot, no, I would not do Salah to Saka. However, it's not that simple, because Saka is 2.8, 2.7 million pound cheaper. So if you're doing Salah to Saka to fund bringing in another player that you desperately want, and it's for free, then yes. I know there are lots of nuances here, but if I had 2 free transfers and I was selling Salah to get Saka because it also allowed me to make an amazing other upgrade that I really wanted to make, then yes, go for it. But if it's just for the sake of having Saka rather than Salah, for me, no. I know Leicester at home is a great fixture, but so is Wolves away. In fact, and this is massive like narrative bias, we call it in psychology, I don't think there's much to this, although there might be a little bit. Do you remember the last time? Well, it wasn't the last time, but I'm talking about Madueke, basically, his hat-trick against Wolves. I'm trying to build a narrative that right wingers do very well against Wolves away, because Madueke got that hat-trick for the Wolves away fixture at Molineux. And if Salah can even get 2 or 3 of those chances that Madueke got, he's absolutely going to finish them. So I do think there is something to be said for that left side being a little bit weaker. Obviously, Nuri, who usually will play on that left, isn't particularly solid defensively. Also, if you have not yet seen, Mosquera, who has been so good for Wolves this season, is out, I think, with an ACL injury, but he's out for the season now as well. That Wolves defence, which was already looking pretty weak, is only looking weaker at the moment. So I guess what I'm saying is this is not a bad fixture this week. And I would argue Crystal Palace in Game Week 7 isn't a bad fixture either. And Chelsea at home isn't... Chelsea have actually been better defensively than people are giving them credit for, but that's not an awful fixture. I mean, it's at Anfield again. Salah tends to be, although not in the last 2 weeks, tends to be pretty good at Anfield. And then even Brighton in Game Week 10 is not bad. It's only that Arsenal fixture, which, yeah, is absolutely rubbish and you don't really want an asset in. But I don't see that as an awful run of fixtures. It's not like you look at it and you're like, wow, I have to get rid of Salah from my team for this run. So, yeah, with transfers, I don't think it's as desperate. However, what I wanted to do is also look at the data, because this is the Game Week preview video. His data is good, but not exceptional. So he's got 9.95 FPL points per 90 so far this season, with 6.18 expected FPL points. So expected FPL points take into account the chance for a clean sheet, and that adds to his bonus points, goal threat, assist threat. If you want to get expected FPL points, which is a really useful metric for me, check it out. There is a link down below to Fantasy Football Hub. You can currently get 50% off. I saw some people mention that it's like a DFS sale, like, you know, like the sofa sales, where there's always a discount of 50%. I have been reliably informed that at the end of this week, the 50% discount will be dropped. I don't know if it will be dropped completely, but it definitely won't be 50%. So if you want to get access to Fantasy Football Hub and all of the stats that I use in these videos, this is the last week to get 50% off. There will be a link down below in the description. But yeah, so you can see that he is overperforming his expected data. But look at that non-penalty expected goals. It's still extremely strong at 0.47. It's one of the best in the Premier League. It's not like elite. Haaland is absolutely blowing that out of the water. So I'm not saying that Haaland is a better... Salah is a better option than Haaland. But that is still really good goal threat. And he is on penalties as well. So he's got really good non-penalty expected goals, plus the pens. What I love about Salah in recent 2 or 3 seasons as well is he's been super creative. Look at that expected assist, 0.27. So he'll get you 1 assist every 4 games based on this expected data. Maybe even more, because you've got to count things such as rebounded shots as well, which don't directly contribute to expected assist. And he's also involved in 1.83 big chances per 90 so far this season. So to recap, Salah is a fantastic FPL option, and I would still say quite comfortably for me the second best asset in FPL. The issue is, Does he justify the price? Probably. But when you also want to squeeze in lots of other expensive assets, there is justification to drop him, especially when someone like a Luis Diaz is sat there from the same attack that is currently outscoring him so far this season. So on Wildcard, no, I wouldn't be having Mohamed Salah, but don't let that put you off if you can squeeze him in. With transfers, I would probably be looking to keep him unless downgrading him allows you to bring in Erling Haaland for free or allows you to bring in someone that you desperately want instead, or you just think that Saka is so good for this week that you've got to have him. So I'll leave it there. Let me know down below, will you be owning Salah in Game Week 6? He's probably going to be my captain once again, so I'm hoping that weak Wolves defence can see quite a few chances to Mohamed Salah. So two players that I wanted to discuss is actually Antoine Semenyo and Bryan Mbeumo. Both of them I think will be highly popular on Game Week 6. And the reason that I wanted to talk about them is they are two players that I would be having on a wildcard in Game Week 6. Not only do they have plum home fixtures in Game Week 6, and for Mbeumo beyond that great as well, but they've just been really good for attacking threat and attacking returns this season. The data's very strong and the minutes are really strong. These are just two players and assets that I just think they've got pretty much everything you would want. So firstly, starting with Antoine Semenyo, the great thing about him, two things. Very cheap, very, very cheap. Like sub 6 million for what you're getting from him is an absolute bargain. And the minutes have been really good as well. He did get an early sub in Game Week 5, but before that, he played 90 minutes in every game. So minutes are looking really secure, really good price, still a relative differential too. The only concern with Semenyo before we jump on to looking at the data is with those fixtures. Southampton and Leicester in the next two is brilliant. And that's why I would have him on a wildcard, because you don't just want to build a long-term team on a wildcard. You also want to be a little bit aggressive and attack the immediate fixtures in front of you. But there's also that fine line of you also don't want to only attack the next two fixtures. Like I've seen some people with triple Bournemouth on wildcard. That is a disaster for me waiting to happen, because in Game Week 8, you're then sat there with Arsenal, Villa, City, and even if you can bench two of them and sell one, your bench is then super weak for at least 3 weeks, and also you're booking in a transfer. So I like the idea of having a Semenyo, or even an Eva Nilsson, or even a Kirkes in defence, but I don't know that I'd be going for 2 or 3 of them, because you do need to look at the long-term fixture. So that's my concern with Semenyo. Also, he's not on penalties, and penalties aren't everything, by the way. But they are very, very useful to have because it's an additional route to point that a lot of other players do have. So I like Semenyo, but he's not without issues. Bryan Mbeumo for me feels like a slightly more safe and obvious option than Semenyo, despite him being obviously like £1.6 million more expensive. What does Bryan Mbeumo have that Semenyo doesn't? I'd say minutes are even more secure. He does have the penalties as well. He also does take the odd set piece, although it appears less of those this season. But he's also got better long-term fixtures. So not only does he have really good fixtures over the next two with West Ham and Wolves, the 3 after that, it's United, Ipswich and Fulham. And I know United is grey on the official FDR rating. It's a pretty decent fixture for an attacker. Ipswich is a really good fixture as well. And Fulham have actually defended a little bit better this season, but it's certainly not a fixture that you mind playing Mbeumo in. So for Mbeumo, and it even goes beyond Game Week 10, by the way, but the next 5 at least are very strong for him. So it just feels like Mbeumo does feel like a no-brainer. I will discuss in a second a reason that you might not want to say that he's a no-brainer, and it does revolve around Wissa being injured. But let's just look at the data so far this season. It's actually almost identical, which is remarkable to them. It's very close to being exactly the same. So expected FPL points, slightly higher for Semenyo with 4.84 versus Bryan Mbeumo's 4.61. Their non-penalty expected goals is identical, 0.35 per 90 for both of them. So they would both get, if they get 90 minutes a game, an expected goal every 3 games roughly, which is really, really good for their prices, especially Semenyo. And then when we look at expected assists, Semenyo is sat at 0.28 and Mbeumo is sat at 0.26. So in terms of creativity, they're basically getting you an assist every 4 games, maybe slightly fewer. So really, really good. So every 3 to 4 games, you're expecting a goal and an assist based on the data from Semenyo and Mbeumo, and that stacks up with what we've seen from their returns this season as well. So it's been a really, really good start for the pair of them. What I noticed, though, is Semenyo takes a lot of shots and Mbeumo takes fewer shots. I was going to say far fewer, but just slightly fewer shots. And you can see that by their big chance involvement. So Semenyo's got 1.05 big chance involvement per 90, and Mbeumo is sat at 1.60. And so just to put into simple terms what that means is, yes, they might put up a similar number of expected goals, which is the key stat really, But Mbeumo is going to get slightly higher quality of chance. Semenyo gets a slightly higher quantity. And I would slightly prefer, if possible, to have those high quality chances because I think they're slightly more likely to be taken, which is maybe shown by the fact that Mbeumo has more attacking returns this season. Hopefully that makes sense. But I just think Mbeumo is involved slightly more in those very key moments in the game. So both of them are fantastic. Like I said, I would definitely have both on a wildcard for me. I just think that Mbeumo for me is the more standout one if you're only going to own one, despite the price, because of the long-term fixtures, the penalties, and also just the slightly higher quality chances. But I would find it very difficult to not own Semenyo. 0.63 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 with 2 promoted teams in the next 2 weeks. I think it's a risk that you can take. I would just say don't pick too many players on a wildcard or with your transfers, whatever it may be, that have long-term more difficult fixtures. Like I don't like the idea, like I said, of 2 or 3 from Bournemouth, especially if you're then loading up on other assets that from Game Week 8 don't have the best run of fixtures. I think it's Chelsea's fixtures. We'll look at Nicholas Jackson in a second, but they start to run out a little bit from Game Week 8 as well. So just be careful. The wildcard is not a free hit. You need to think long-term as well. But regardless, Antoine Semenyo, Bryan Mbeumo, 2 players that I really like from Game Week 6 and beyond. Sorry guys, random cut because I didn't talk about Wissa being out and how that might affect Mbeumo. I keep neglecting to talk about that. And I think it could be a big thing for Mbeumo and for Brentford. But the issue, I suppose, with talking about this is we don't directly know. Like I could go back to previous games in previous seasons where Tony wasn't there and Wissa wasn't there and Mbeumo was. But it's going to be a very small sample. And also the team has developed and changed since then. And I trust Thomas Frank, in all honesty. I think he's a fantastic manager. And Carvalho and Schade, the 2 players that could fit into the system in place of Wissa, I think are both fantastic assets. And also 2 players that you could take a risk on in a Game Week 6 wildcard, especially Carvalho, who got 86 minutes in Game Week 5. But I just don't know, I guess. Like, I could hypothesize that I think I said on FPL Therapy, which was released yesterday. And by the way, go check out the episode. We had Chunks on the podcast. I've released a new podcast called FPL Therapy. Do go and check that out. But I said that I think it might make Mbeumo like a 5 to 10% weaker option. But even if that is the case, which is just a hypothesis, it might not. He's still fantastic. So yeah, maybe one to monitor. And if you're not wildcarding this week, maybe you say, do you know what? I'm going to hold off on Mbeumo, see how Wissa being out affects him over the short term. But for me, he's still fantastic. So I wanted to at least address it, but I don't want to say much more because it's all a hypothesis. Do let me know down below, though. Do you think Wissa being out will negatively affect Bryan Mbeumo? So 2 other players that I wanted to discuss is actually Dominic Solanke and Nicholas Jackson, around that £7.5 to £8 million price point, because I think that both of these will be very much overlooked, especially on wildcard, but also with transfers, given that we have really other good cheap options. If João Pedro's fit, he's fantastic. Welbeck's been really good. Chris Wood, I think even Calvert-Lewin has still been decent so far this season and is a great pick. So there are lots of cheap forwards that you can go for, along with Erling Haaland, that allow you to squeeze in those expensive midfielders and also maybe like a double Arsenal defence, which we'll discuss in a second. So I think the 2 of them will be massively overlooked. But do I like them as assets? Absolutely. And I would really like to try and get one of them into my team. And if I am wildcarding in 7, which looks very likely, I'd say there is a good chance that I go for the one on the left, and that is Dominic Solanke. So in terms of fixtures coming up, I do think that I prefer Spurs' fixtures. In fact, I do prefer Spurs' fixtures. However, Chelsea's aren't quite as bad as they look at a first glance. So for Spurs, Man United this week is a fine fixture for the attackers. We've spoken about this already. Eze got 2 big chances against Man United alone. Solanke will have his chances. He absolutely will. So that's not a bad fixture. Brighton isn't great, but it's also kind of like a decent fixture on paper you'd expect Spurs to create. West Ham have been all over the place defensively. Crystal Palace have not defended well this season. And Villa actually have been a little bit better. But they aren't great fixtures. Like, you don't look at any of the next 5 for Spurs and say that is a banker of a fixture where they definitely go out there and score 2 or 3 goals. But I also don't dislike any of them. There aren't any there I'd say, oh, I'd really rather not play Solanke. There's not a City, Liverpool, Arsenal fixture. So fixtures-wise, really no issue. For Nicholas Jackson, the fixtures are slightly weaker, but again, they still play against Brighton. They still play against Man United. So 2 fixtures are exactly the same. One of the other fixtures is against Newcastle, which, again, is a fine fixture on paper. They've not been defending well. The other 2 fixtures are very tough. I'd say Forest at home. Forest look like one of the better defences in the league. Last season, they were 4th for expected goals conceded. This season, they're 2nd for expected goals conceded. By all accounts, Forest are just a very good defence. And Liverpool away is a very tough fixture as well. So fixtures-wise, they are better for Solanke, but Brighton, Newcastle and United being in the next 5 for Jackson, I don't mind it. And the thing is, Spurs and Chelsea will just score goals. They're both very, very decent attacks so far this season. And because of the nature of the teams, they will create chances. So I don't really mind having either of these. But from sort of game week 8 onwards, the fixtures are certainly stronger for Spurs. So short term, over the next 2 weeks, I think they're very similar, but from game week 8, I would just prefer to have Solanke in my team. The reason that I wanted to discuss the two of them, though, is the data is just so good. So look at that non-penalty expected goals for Solanke and Jackson. 0.71 for Solanke in not very many minutes, by the way, right? He missed out in game weeks 2 and game week 3, so not as many minutes as some of the other players, but in a short amount of time, he has shown how brilliant he is. He actually accumulated 1.6 something XG against Brentford alone. So you could say that that skewed the data, but a man that can get over 1.5 XG in a game and 4 big chances is someone that I am extremely interested in. And the other thing is Maddison is firing at the moment. Like, I really like James Maddison as a pick. I spoke about it on Twitter. James Maddison is second for XGI in the league so far this season, only beaten by Erling Haaland. Like, Maddison is on fire. And when Maddison's on fire, anyone that is playing as a forward in that team will get chances. And Son is still very creative on that left-hand side too. So I seriously like Dominic Solanke as an option. You can see him involved in 1.68 big chances per 90 as well, which is a crazy number. But Jackson's got even more goal threat. And he's obviously played more minutes. So 0.78 non-penalty expected goals for Jackson. But both of those, I mean, when we talk about Mohamed Salah was 0.47, which I said was very good. These two are just getting so many chances. And he's actually been involved in 1.96 big chances per 90, Nicholas Jackson, which is even crazier, obviously, than Dominic Solanke. So in terms of the data, it's slightly stronger for Jackson. All I would say is Jackson's minutes aren't as good. So these are per 90 stats, but Jackson's only getting 73 minutes per game. When you obviously equal it out per game or per start rather than per 90, Solanke's is better because, yes, Solanke's only started 3 games, but he's pretty much played 90 minutes in all 3 of them, 89 minutes per game on average. So Solanke's more nailed, and if the data's going to be very similar per 90, it therefore makes Solanke's data better. And I think on top of that, whilst Jackson's finishing looks a lot better this season, he looks a lot more clinical and he's taken his chances well, Solanke for me is a better finisher overall from what we've seen in their career. And there is also a small chance that Solanke takes penalties. So I just think for me at the moment, Solanke has slightly better fixtures, slightly better data when you take into account minutes, plays more minutes so he's on the pitch at the end of games when a lot of goals are scored. And I think that was everything. And as I think he's a slightly better finisher was the other thing as well. So I think Solanke is a marginally better option than Jackson if you are choosing one or the other at the moment. But I think both are great. If you were telling me you're going to put Jackson in your team, really no issues with that. My only slight concern with Jackson, before we then move on to the final section of the video, is he has now come out in press conferences and said, sorry, that is Maresca, and said that Nkunku is preferred as a number 9 for Chelsea. And Nkunku is really, really, really talented. He's shown in the games outside of the Prem, against weaker opposition, obviously. I think it was against Barrow when he scored his hat-trick yesterday. But he's shown that he is a goal scorer and that he can absolutely play that role for Chelsea. So I do think there will be some point in the next 5 or 6 games that Nkunku starts ahead of Jackson. Or maybe we start to see Jackson getting much earlier subs at like 60, 65. So yeah, for me, there are enough things to just put me off of Jackson instead of someone like a Solanke, but I think they're very close. Let me know down below if you are managing to squeeze in either of these 2 assets. So guys, I think a massive decision for a lot of people this week is around which Arsenal players to own. I think if you're on a wildcard, you definitely have 3 of them, given they've got Leicester, Southampton and Bournemouth across the next 3. And also they are one of, if not the best team in the league at the moment, along with Manchester City. So it just makes sense to have 3. And I think even if you're not on a wildcard, having at least 2 does make a lot of sense. But especially for those that have 3, the big question is, do you double up on the defense or do you double up on the attack? I just want to caveat this section. It's one of the reasons for it being at the end, because I hate recording a video and then it just being made redundant by news. Arteta has suggested that Arsenal have a long-term injury, and there are a lot of rumours going around that there is a serious long-term injury to at least one player in the Arsenal team. That could be a number of players. Calafiori looked like he got injured at the weekend. David Raya was seen with a bandage on his knee, although it looked more like a plaster than strapping. So I would suggest that Raya's was more like a graze to his knee or something like that. But Raya was limping when he left the stadium. There were other players that were going down with knocks. Martinelli looked like he was struggling at points. And obviously Saka came off at half-time. So if we get news that Raya was out long-term or Saka's out long-term, obviously this completely changes the discussion, and I'll cover that in Friday's video and also the Saturday deadline stream. So make sure to subscribe for all of that content and my updated thinking. But let's say it is someone that doesn't start and is less important to Arsenal starting 11. There are rumours it could be Calafiori. I'm not going to keep speculating, but let's say it's someone like that. Well, then the decision still remains probably fairly similar of those key assets that you might want to load up on. So, do I think double Arsenal defence or double Arsenal attack? Fixtures-wise, I actually think defence is slightly weaker. So Leicester and Southampton, they are fixtures to really go out there and target, for me, for attackers. You would expect Arsenal to score goals in back-to-back home games against two very weak defences. And even Bournemouth, to some extent, they're a very decent attack. Defensively, they're also okay, by the way, but you saw Liverpool put 3 goals past them. Like, they aren't perfect defensively. So those next 3 look really good for attackers. And I also think, to some extent, like Liverpool, Newcastle, Chelsea, listen, Arsenal will keep clean sheets across this spell, but they don't scream to me great fixtures for defenders. So I think fixtures-wise, I prefer attack. But then everything else really tends to lead me back towards the defence. So before I even look at the data, pricing is very important. And I think when we say double attack, it really is Saka and Havertz. You could go for a Declan Rice if you want to. You could take a risk on Martinelli or Trossard, assuming they're fit and available. But I just don't see the desire to do that when you've got like Semenyo and Mbeumo at similar prices. It really is just Kai Havertz. So when you're saying the Saka and Havertz are taking up 18.2, 18.3 million of your budget, that's a lot of money. You could get 3 Arsenal defenders for less, right? You could go for Raya, Gabriel and Saliba, and you're getting 3 Arsenal for the price of 2. Now, I'm not saying you go out there and get 3 Arsenal defenders just because they are cheaper, but price needs to be taken into account. And when you've got someone like Chris Wood, or again, if he's fit, João Pedro, or a Calvert-Lewin, I'm not saying they're better than Havertz, but they are quite a bit cheaper. You can save so much money and then just go for 2 Arsenal defenders instead. So I feel like pricing starts to lead you back towards the defence. Even, by the way, Jackson or Solanke, they're not much cheaper than Havertz. They're a little bit, though. And could they score a similar number of points? Absolutely. So I think, yeah, pricing makes me lean towards the defence. But when we look at the data, so what I've got here is the 2023-24 data for shots conceded per 90, non-penalty expected goals per 90, shots they have taken per 90, so from an attacking perspective, and non-penalty expected goals per 90. And I've also got that for the 2024-25 season. So that is the 2 rows there. I want to massively caveat this by saying Arsenal have had a very tricky opening 5 fixtures in terms of in comparison to most teams. They've played against the likes of Brighton, City, Aston Villa. They have not had a particularly good run, even Spurs. Like, apart from that game 1 against Wolves, it's not been a good run, particularly in terms of fixtures. And also, they've had to play 2 games for large spells of the game with 10 men against Brighton and against City. So you need to take context into account here that they've had a very difficult run and they've not had 11 men for 2 of the games. However, I still think that when I watch them, when they've had 11 men on the pitch and taken into account context, I do think there has been a slight drop-off in their performances from an attacking perspective and also a defensive perspective. So in 2023-24, they conceded 8.5 shots per 90. In 2024-25, that has jumped up to 18 shots per 90. Now, before everyone says it's because they played against City and City took 20 shots, actually, before the City game, they'd still conceded just under 15 shots conceded per 90. Even if you remove the Brighton game, which again, Brighton took a lot of shots, they still were conceding more shots per 90 than in the 2023-24 season. There are 2 things to note here. I think that generally their midfield looks a little weak this season. I don't know if it's an Arteta tactical switch. I don't know if it's just the fact that they've not really had everyone fully fit at the same time for a large spell. Their midfield is getting run through a lot. And I think generally Arsenal just look like they are conceding more chances than in previous seasons. But this makes Raya arguably an even better option because, listen, Arsenal are still one of the best defences we have ever witnessed in the Premier League. This Arsenal defence is a joke and they will keep clean sheets. But this is forcing Raya to make more saves. So I don't know if this will continue. Maybe against Leicester and Southampton, they concede like 3 shots combined because these are weaker attacks. But I just wanted to point to the fact Arsenal are conceding more shots. And you can see that it is almost double the non-penalty expected goals conceded per 90 that we saw in the 23-24 season. So again, let's see if once they go into a slightly nicer fixture run, and now that they've settled down a bit, and hopefully they can keep 11 men on the pitch, maybe these defensive numbers will improve drastically. But for me, this shows why Raya has been such a fantastic option. Because yes, they're still very good defensively, but they're not quite as strong, and they are conceding a hell of a lot of shots. So it means that Raya is making saves. The more worrying stuff for me is from an attacking perspective, because Again, even if you remove the 2 periods of play where they only had 10 men, they're not taking as many shots and they're not creating as many clear-cut opportunities. And I spoke to Chunks again on FPL Therapy, who is an Arsenal fan, and the consensus with Arsenal fans is they're just not creating that free-flowing football that they did last season. And the big issue there is Ødegaard is now injured as well long-term. That isn't going to help them at all from an attacking perspective. So last season they had 17.29 shots per 90. This season they're averaging 10. And then last season, they had 1.86 non-penalty expected goals per 90. This season, it's 1.17. So again, all of that context in place with fixtures and their man advantage, or disadvantage, I should say, I still don't really think they're attacking quite as well. And I think that shows when you watch them. And Ødegaard being out is a massive loss. I think when I put all of this together, I think without sitting on the fence, my answer is double Arsenal defence. And the reason I say that is, fixtures-wise, I think it leans slightly towards the attackers, but I still think clean sheets are there. The defensive data, I think context is slightly more important in terms of, yes, fixtures were really, really tough against some pretty difficult attacks. And also, like I said, those spells where they did concede a lot due to being with 10 men. So I think that is slightly more important for me, the context there. And I just think I don't fully trust the Arsenal attack at the moment, regardless of Ødegaard being out, but especially with him being out. I think they will struggle slightly more in comparison to what we saw last season. So, if we're talking long-term, you have to keep these assets in place. I would say Gabriel, Raya, Saka, without knowing what this mystery injury is, again, that I caveated at the start. However, and this is the final thing, if you're talking in terms of upside, the upside is definitely there with double attack. Because if we're saying that Arsenal will keep clean sheets, but they won't concede as many chances because the teams aren't as good, Raya's probably not getting 9 and 10 pointers again. For Raya, even if they keep back-to-back clean sheets, you're talking about probably like 6, 6, 7 or something like that. So let's say he gets 18 to 20 points over the next 3, which would be still, I think, overestimating it. If Havertz gets a few goals, or 2 goals and 2 assists or something, he probably outscores Raya. So I think the upside is there with the attack. But because I don't think you want to just target the next 2 or 3, I think you want to keep these Arsenal assets for a long time. I would say Gabriel, Raya, Saka. Let me know what your current plan is down below. So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 6 preview. Hopefully you did enjoy. And if you did, please do smash that like button and make sure to subscribe as well. There is plenty more content still to come this week, including team selection, wildcard draft, deadline decisions, and also a deadline stream as well. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, bye-bye.